journey beyond imposter syndrome. This is where I invite you into a space where high achievers and spiritual leaders converge to redefine success and self-worth. By sharing transformative stories and engaging with thought leaders, this podcast serves as a roadmap for navigating the complexities of imposter syndrome. It's an intimate look into overcoming personal barriers tailored for those who value wisdom, leadership, and intuition in business and life. Join me at the Humble Warrior Podcast with Alani Bankhead. Welcome to the Humble Warrior Podcast. I'm your host, Alani Bankhead, and I'm really honored today to have Dr. Eugene Kim. She's a child psychiatrist, public speaker, and podcast host here on the Humble Warrior Podcast. She's also the founder of her own private practice called Restore Psychiatry MDPLLC and her media company, Good News Mental Health. I love that name. One of the things that I really love about Dr. Kim is that she bridges the gap between mental health and spirituality because there's just so much shame and guilt stemming from different church experiences. I see it all the time in my law enforcement career. And so I'm super stoked about this episode because I think there's going to be a lot of healing happening. And so we are going to be talking about probably some pretty difficult topics like church and spiritual trauma. We're also probably going to be talking about child sex abuse and some other things. But I would really encourage you guys to stay with us during the journey. It's going to be totally worth it. Her message of hope is super empowering to me, and I'm really excited to share it with you guys. Dr. Kim, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. And I'm just really excited to be with the like-minded warriors. And in our discovery call, I just loved it because I just want to have fun with people who likes to have fun doing the good work. And I'm just really excited for this conversation.
Yes, dude, me too. It's so wild when you're like, do we just become best friends? Or like
Yes, it
stepbrothers
really
moment.
was like that.
I love it. Okay, let's just start from the beginning. Tell us about yourself. How on earth did you end up in child psychiatry and spirituality and public speaking? This is such a mishmash of so many different things. I'd love to hear all about it.
Absolutely. So it is a mishmash. I grew up in very Korean culture. We immigrated when I was 10 to Houston, Texas. And my dad is a physician. And it was very much, oh, you're going to be the doctor so that you can carry on my practice and stuff like that. So it was like already decided for me. And I did everything I could to not do that. So I wanted to be a cartoon artist when I was like 5 or 7. I wanted to go to art school like every time. But it was just really interesting where I'm a very logical and analytical person. And when I have these conversations with God, when there was like a fork in the road and I'm asking God, okay, like which way? In that moment, it made logical sense in that moment to like take that leap. So I can't tell you that I had this 10, 20-year plan to be where I was today. It's very much like another day in the desert. Like, where are you? And it's just every moment, it's just made logical sense. But I did fight it. I did fight a lot. And even becoming a child psychiatrist, I got married and I was pregnant and I didn't want to. My husband's a child psychiatrist too. And we would have to interview together all these things. And I was like, dude, I'm like, second trimester, I don't want to even go. And I'm just done with training. So I just didn't want to apply and let him be a child psychiatrist. And he was like, I think you will really like child psychiatry. And I was like, dude, I don't have time for that. I'm bloated. I'm like sick. But what ended up happening was my home program had one spot left. And word of the mouth, the program director knew that I was remotely interested in child psychiatry and she asked me. So then I didn't even have to travel when I was pregnant. So it's amazing, miraculous, just a little crack that opened for me. So one leading to the next, and the next crazy part journey is like, what the heck is a Christian or child psychiatrist doing with a podcast? Like, I'm pretty sure my parents did not sacrifice everything for me to be a content creator, but the crossroad on that was when I was working on I love the term that you used, just messy middle, right? Just working on myself in as a child of God, but also as a mental health provider and also trauma survivor. and just a human being, and I was working on myself, and God really convicted me was if you I'm such a big part of your healing journey, but if you don't incorporate what we're doing here, aren't you holding out on the rest of the world? And I got so convicted and I was like, you're right. Like, how do I translate my experience to the rest of the world that misunderstands mental health and misunderstands spirituality? And how can I bring it together? So can't say that I got it all figured out. I'm still young, but this is my journey and I'm so excited for it.
Oh my gosh, that is so good. And you're reminding me of I had a little bit of a convicting moment last week myself, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, but I admittedly have shirked the responsibility of leading teams for a while. I left my last W-2 job and I was just like, I'm done with people. I was like, I'm gonna manage myself. I'm
Yeah,
done.
yeah.
I'm so tired. And with everything that's happening in the world, I could just feel that intuitive hit of this is what I made you for, and you're
Mm.
shirking that responsibility. And I was like, oh man, I'm sorry. And the acknowledgement of it's gonna be hard. It's really hard, but I think to your point, what I felt when you shared that bit of conviction you experienced, which is what resonated with me, was that conviction is not accusatory. It's just so loving and it feels like truth. I don't know what truth as a feeling feels like. I guess maybe peace or wisdom or something like that. So when we talk about conviction, that's more of what we're talking about, not like some on high person being like, you
Yeah.
need to do this. And so now for my audience who's not super into the medical world, what does a child psychiatrist do exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a child psychiatrist, meaning I'm a medical doctor with an MD that deals with behavior, emotional, and mental health. We study the brain, but not like neurology. Neurology is like more of a linkage from movement, muscle movement, but there's a lot of overlap with neurology and psychiatry, but there's more of kind of the whys and the stories and the narratives that psychiatrists just really get interested in. So we do diagnose mental health disorders like depression, anxiety, PTSD, autism, ADHD, and because we're MD, we can treat that with the medications. And so there's a differentiation between a therapist or a psychologist who cannot prescribe medications but at the same time can still have a diagnostic accessibility, but we can treat that with medication. And for
Okay.
me being a child psychiatrist, I can comfortably see patients from age even 3, 4 to teenagers.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. And then again, because I'm not in your world, the difference between child psychiatrist and a child psychologist, what would
Right.
that be?
So psychiatry is more of there's a lot of overlap, but there's more biochemical and pharmacology involved in our training where we're trained to prescribe medications, know the side effects, know how to circumvent the side effects, like what other options there are. That's the nuts and bolts of our training. Psychology would be they're really good at doing array of tests. So when you go to child psychologist to get diagnostic assessment, or neuropsychological assessment, that's when they do the IQ test, math comprehension, reading comprehension. So the array of tests to really help us gather data so that we can get to the clear diagnosis. So child psychiatrists and child psychologists actually work really well together. Um, because if there's a patient who's, man, I only have an hour with you at this time, but I can see a little bit autism, or is it sensory? Is it IQ issue? Then I'll recommend neuropsychological testing and they can get that test done and help me diagnose better.
That's super cool. Yeah, okay. So now we are a little bit more familiar with your world, and that does
Yeah.
sound very interesting. And so I'm really fascinated by your journey to public speaking and your podcasting and this heart that you have to help heal wounds, maybe inflicted by the church or spiritual or religious institutions. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about that whole mission?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would like to say that As I'm maturing in my own personal journey and spiritual journey, and on the other side of reconciliation, I can see that best intentions can still hurt. And so when I share my childhood journey, I don't want to discredit the intentions of the church institutions or even my parents, but it still hurt. And I think having a psychiatry background, I can dissect it a little bit, where there was a lot of Pharisaic tendencies in church, right? Do as I say, but not as I do, right? And outcome measurement based, like external measurement based measurement of worth, right? If you're not tithing enough, if you're cursing, if you're drinking, then you're lesser and you need to achieve for higher. That was definitely the big component of Christianity that I grew up with. And as an immigrant one who's very much, this is wrong, this doesn't make sense. And when I got really tired of this moving targets, like I'm never good enough, and I see the leaders in my family or my church, and I'm like, God, if you exist, this is your leader and this is your representation of who you are. I'm done. This is not a ladder that I want to climb. So at 16, I made a private conversation with God. I don't think you exist. Now I'm going to create my ladder of success in morals and ethics because I can't trust these people. And I did what I thought a teenager was fun. I definitely rebelled and had that private prodigal daughter journey, which came to, yep, which came to a halt when there was like significant, I guess, danger in that, right? Meeting the wrong people, doing the wrong things, and it's really scared me. And I told my mom at that time, I don't know what is happening, but ground me. And I said, take away my phone. I can't go out. So I grounded myself. And that speaks to, looking back, protection of my parents' intentions. I don't think a lot of times we know what to do, but we just feel like we need to. So then we just do things when we don't know what to do. And I think at that point in my life, I don't think my parents knew what to do with me. But I was just like, I just can't live this way, or I'm gonna possibly die. So then I retracted myself and I was reading through James with my mom, who has a gift of Bible teaching. And there was a verse there that if any one of you is sick, then let the elders pray for you and you'll be healed and you'll be forgiven for your sin. And again, analytical mind, I'm like, okay, sickness, healing, got that. But forgiven of your sin, that is not in the equation. Like it was not even brought up. What is that? And I asked my mom, why are they forgiven even if they didn't repent? Like that, there's no equation for that. And she was like, and this is the Holy Spirit really working through her because again, she and my dad caused a lot of hurts by unintentionally, you know, trying to figure things out. But in that moment, Holy Spirit really spoke through her because she said, what if it is? And I said, grace should not be that easy. And she said, but what if it is? And then it just all clicked where I was like, okay, my mom has no idea where I've been, but if she can extend that grace even for that second, and God knows where I've been, like, of course, I owe everything to this guy. So that's how my church hurt and just healing journey started. And again, after that, I started to read the Bible and really study it in my analytical ways. And there was a lot of things that I wrestled with God, growing up. I'm 36, right? Like millennial. A lot of the cultural norms of what is nice and what is kind, right? What is love? All these definitions are thrown around. And I was really wrestling with God. And there was one moment that, especially when you read through the Old Testament, God kills a whole country or a whole sect of people for little sins, measurably little sins. And I remember wrestling with God. I was like, God, if I was your PR, this would not fly. I was like, God, I don't know if you want to promote this side of you. And that was when he told me, I don't care what other people think. Like, I'm going to stay me. And you have to learn who I am. I can't change myself for you to fit in your understanding of who I am. And that was really the partnership and respect, like mutual respect that I had with God growing up. And I really want to share that in the platform so that as I'm learning who God is and who He's not, right? And these are the reasons why. I really hope that it can give a lot of hope and healing because, like me and maybe like you, Jesus and God was not portrayed in a reasonable way, a wholesome way, where there is a room for discussion, there's a room for wrestling, there is room for questions, and there's room for doubt, there's room for shame and guilt to work it out. And God really honors that sacred place. And I just wish that I can share that as I'm trying to figure out my own thing.
Oh my gosh, bro. There's just so much good stuff in there. I'm gonna see if I can keep my analysis straight because there's some really great nuggets of truth in there that I want to make sure people are clearly understanding. So, first of all, one of the tools that seemed to be powerful for you was in challenging God, right? So, challenging your higher power. And I think, especially bigger picture, you alluded to one of the kind of key detrimental elements of the earthly church, which is it's very binary, right? It's like a
Mhm.
to-do list. It's very black and white. You're either compliant or you're not. And I think more and more this concept of grace in that messy middle is becoming more accepted.
Mhm.
But, and again, intended, right? If the intent is, in our case, Jesus is the bar, like that's where you want to get to. But of course,
Mhm.
we're never going to get there because we're not perfect in any way, shape, or form. But any gap between what the Jesus standard is and where you are, like that's not acceptable, right? Is the
Mhm.
messaging that you get. And
Mhm.
so the acknowledgement first and foremost that it's not meant to be a church hurt. To me, I had to reframe it to think of it more of a if I shoot for the moon but land in the stars, like I still did really well. But unfortunately, a lot of people use that as a tool of judgment, which causes a
Mhm.
lot of pain. But challenging your higher power is something that I can probably guess you and I definitely was taught that was not allowed. Like,
Mhm.
God is sovereign, God knows everything, God's right, everything's in the Bible. You just have to be compliant
Yeah.
is the messaging that I got as a child. And so the concept of challenging a higher power, especially with a lot of the clients I work with, they're like, I can't do that. And I'm like, why not? And one of my favorite phrases is God can handle all of your fucks.
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
people are like, you've cussed at God. I'm like, yes, I get really mad, especially when it comes to working in the justice field and child sex crimes. When certain injustices happen, I'm just like, what the fuck, bro? Are you kidding me
Mhm.
right now? And that's a tool that I had to learn how to harness to discharge my frustration. But it's
Yeah.
with the understanding that God sees my pain. God knows I'm cussing him out internally anyway. Like it's just
Mhm.
comical to try to hide it. At
Yeah.
least that's my interpretation. And the purpose of these conversations is to present different options for listeners to decide, is that something I want to try, test it out, see how it goes. And so I think what I gathered from that part of your story is God was always gracious to meet you in that space of I don't understand, right? And but he gave you the answers as maybe you were able to receive them or whatever it might be. So, guys, challenging your higher power is a really powerful tool. I would really encourage you to try it. Just see what happens. You know what? If you try it and it doesn't work, okay, then maybe it's not a tool for you. But I bet you're going to be surprised at the answer. Just saying.
The
Mhm.
thing about challenging the higher power, sorry to
Oh, yeah.
interject, the whole key is you don't have a relationship with God at all if you're not authentic to yourself. And God is like, what is the point? Can I just say, I have kids, two little kids, they're 4 and 6, right? If they were like people pleasing me and saying, I'm a goody two shoes and I won't say things to piss off mom, I won't say things to make mom mad, like, then I don't really know them at all. And my pure desire is to know them as who they are, not make me feel good about being a good mom, right? Like just get out of my space, make me feel good about myself, make me secure that I'm a mom, I'm a good mom, and I'm doing all the right things. And I think that's where it was wrong is that good intentions, but insecurity in the leadership made us perform so that they feel good about being a leader. But it's not about that. And God is, let's just cut the crap and just come to me and just come to me with all the problems. I want my kids to yell at me and express their frustration instead of suppressing them and just blow up, when they're teenagers or something like that, right? Like, I'm like, okay, let's just come to the table and just wrestle it out. And I think God has that heart where I'm like, dude, if you're just performing for me, I don't even know you. And just a cool thing that I thought of the other day, it was like Jesus' prayer to Gethsemane. I think that's like a perfect example where he's challenging God too. I was like talking to my husband the other day. I was like, can you imagine Jesus was alive with God? They knew this plan, the plan B from all along, like for eternity, lived 30 years, perfect life. And like the day before, Jesus, I really don't want to do this. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what earthly leader was like, what the heck are you talking about? Like, we talked about this, we rehearsed this for eternity, and now you don't want to do it? That would be the tone that we will all have. But the fact that Jesus can say that out loud to God shows you God's not scared of anything. Like, and what do you think he was said that really turned Jesus around? I know, buddy. But remember what we talked about? But I understand. I don't want you to go through this either. That's probably what he said. And Jesus like, okay, got it. I just need to go through this. So it's like you said, leadership, insecurity, good intentions doesn't matter if you're insecure. You have to be secure to handle anything. And that's the role of leaders, right? It's not to react, but it's to handle things, right? So I really trust that 120% that God is a secure God. And this is a reason why we can challenge comfortably and confidently because he's not scared. He's really not
Right.
scared.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I was just talking to somebody about that biblical story the other day too, because imposter syndrome, my method teaches that the thing your inner imposter, your self-doubt says is your biggest weakness to hide it is actually the thing that you need to achieve your life purpose. And a lot of our work and purpose is a result of pain that we are choosing to harness to create
Mm,
solutions for the world. So we heal the world, we're also healing ourselves as a
yeah.
byproduct in the process. And so I was talking to this client and they love their mission. They know they're called to it, but that fear is so loud. And they're like, I
Mhm.
don't want to do it. And I'm like, Jesus didn't want to do it either. And I'm like, he literally
Mhm.
was God. Like he knew better than we do what his result was going to be. And even
Mhm.
knowing all of that, he still led, right? He was a leader in that moment for us to say, God, I don't want to do this. This
Yeah.
sucks. He was crying blood, right? Is what
Yeah.
the Bible says. And what a beautiful example for us that when we are doing our life purpose, we're going to all have moments where we're like, screw this. I am out
Yeah.
of here. And I've already done that. I just shared where I was like, I just got convicted. I got to get back in leadership. And I want to go back to what you said about grace too, because I think it ties it in really well.
Mhm.
I have to look up the definition for grace quarterly because it still blows my mind. What you were saying about with church and pharisaical leaders and that demand of perfection because of their insecurities in leadership or whatever the reason might be. But
Mhm.
the biblical grace is God's freely given undeserved love and assistance to humanity. So that moment that your mom is, but what if it is that simple? Right?
Mhm.
You are not loved because you do or you achieve. You are loved because you exist.
Mhm.
That is it.
Yeah.
And my brain, for a long time, initially, when I was asking these questions, it was really hard for me to restructure my brain to
Mm.
believe this because you're
Mhm.
so used to, especially in Western society, if you're not achieving, you're not valuable.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I think that message is just super powerful, what you're saying, that the core that I'm hearing is it's all about being authentic to who you are and just acknowledging, accepting, and loving yourself as you are right now in that messy middle. And people are in messier journeys right now than other people are, right? And that's totally okay. And so I want to go back to something you also said about you were like, there are all these insecure leaders that are leading, and it's causing all this unintentional damage. And this is part of the reason why churches are struggling so much these days, and people are so pissed at the church, right?
Yeah.
But you had mentioned before we started talking that one of the things you're trained to do as a psychiatrist is you have to become on the outside, but, with imposter syndrome, especially, it's always you're giving this appearance that you are squared away and you're good and
Mm.
there's no weakness or anything like that. But inside, you're an internal wreck
Mhm.
of constantly seeking that external validation, right? And so I'm curious about your journey to like, how did you manage that messy middle and bring that calm to the inside of you?
Yeah, I talked about, and you said Western world, right? That grace is so hard. I will testify Eastern world very much the same, right? And it's a human condition that we want significance and safety. And that's what I definition as like a human need. And we try to seek it in other external values. And I think there's two different words for definition of sin. There's sin that we do, and then there's a sin that we is a condition that we're born into, right? We're born thirsty for a sense of significance and safety, and we can commit sin to meet that condition. And but I would like to move forward where I was trying to achieve this sense of safety and significance by performing. And I was praised by how attractive I looked. I was praised by what grade I was getting, what chair of cello and orchestra I was getting. And that kind of praise, it was only conditioned to success. And I think it created a monster in me when I was like, I need more. And then the high will die down and I'll continue to get for another thing. So my still to my day, my husband says, you need to chill out because if there's a lull in my business, there's like a free space. I'm like, I think we need to adopt a puppy. Like, or like, I think I need to start another business. And he's, yo, just like chill. And he's such a good example of inner peace. And he has his issue too. It's like inner peace at all costs. So then he just says no to everything. That's his issue. But for me, I'm like, it's never enough. Like, where's my next source of sense of significance and security and safety coming from? When you are thirsty for that, I think you just can't stop.
But there is something really important. So you had talked about trying to achieve safety and significance through performance. And so for you, it was
Yeah.
grades, like what chair you were, all those things. What was
Oh,
the
the messy
point?
middle, the messy middle.
Yeah, but what was the
Yeah.
point at which you realized I can't keep doing this, right? This monster
Yeah.
is not enough inside of me. There's never enough
Yeah.
achievement. And so, what was that trigger that caused you to shift your perspective and realize that, oh no, I need to operate a different way?
See, Holy Spirit is working in this conversation because we just brought it back. The monster has gotten out of control where, number one, there's a moment when I was walking, and I think it was after my first child was born, and we're just going for a walk. And it's so stereotypical, but I'm like thinking about like 20 different things in my head. I'm like not enjoying the walk. And I always ask my husband, what are you thinking about? And he says nothing. And it's now I know and trust that it is nothing. And I'm like, are you serious? I'm like having 10 different dialogues in my head and you're absolutely nothing. And he was like, no, it's really nothing. And and I remember I prayed. I was like, God, can I just have his brain for 5 seconds? I just want to know what it feels like. And in that walk, there was 5 seconds where I just looked at the trees and there's like a breeze going on, and I just was so focused on that tree. The leaves are like bristling through. And it was 5 seconds, and I was like hooked. I was like, I want that to be my baseline. So I started thinking, what do I need to do? And this at this point, already a child psychiatrist, right? I already have the training, but to say that child psychiatrists, therapists, and all the mental health providers, like we're calm on the outside, but inside we're still dealing with our own stuff. And you're right, as I'm healing my patients, I get healed too by what I say to them. Like it's a really symbiotic experience that I just really cherish and enjoy. So then I got that 5 second of peace and I was like, okay, this is what it means to have nothing. So I was like hooked. But another thing that happened that I realized a monster was going out of control was I grew up in a household where, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, there was no emotional safety. It was very conditional. So if my parents are mad at me something, then I don't know when the reconciliation will happen next. Or is it coming? Is it? So there's a lot of eggs walking on eggshells. Like, what is gonna make my parents mad? Am I good enough? All these questions was the foundation of my childhood that led me to a very hyper vigilant and hyper aroused person in relationships. And if you can understand, every friendship that fell away was a threat to me. Oh my gosh, what did I do? What did I do? And then there was a back and forth argument, defense, offense. Like dialogue in my head, and it got so crazy that I hurt some people that I shouldn't have hurt it because I reacted out of that like PTSD hyper aroused mind. And they thank God that they took the brave step of confronting me about it. They were like, "You thought that about me? Seriously?" And that was like a wake up call. I don't want to repeat this generation's trauma. And now that I realize that this is in me, I want to get it out. And then I started getting really serious in therapy because I was like, I need help to pace myself because I don't know if a lot of you're like me. When I see a problem, I like go to the deepest part and rub salt around it. If I had a surgical wound, I will get a bottle of bleach and salt, right? Like I'm like that intense. And this monster, I knew that I couldn't do it that fast and that effectively. And that's why I needed to get a therapist to pace me to actually go slower so that I'm not missing anything as I'm going through this journey of ups and downs and that I don't get overwhelmed with the progress. So again, it was a really humble moment to realize that the monster that hurt me was in me and I was starting to hurt people and my kids. I said some things that exactly what my parents said to my kids, and that was like there was many wake up calls. I'm like, I don't ever want to say that to my kids ever again, right? I just said it out of narrative habit, and I was like, no, this is gonna end here. So that really working, a lot of crying, a lot of journaling, a lot of support, a lot of just Holy Spirit, and a lot of learning about God and who He's not. Everything just came to a place where I'm just like, okay, like I'm inner peace. And like you said, that the conviction I love before me would have been like, oh man, I'm failing at God thing again. But what God taught me was my spiritual gift is attentiveness and planning and responsibility. So I use that to default and as my idol. And that's why it weighed so heavy on me when I'm not doing quote unquote what I'm supposed to do. But now God gave me freedom to say, I'm not depending on you to do this. Like, result will be the same. So I'm freeing you from that burden of, I have to do this, I should do this, but you get to do it with me. And do you want to do that? So there was a lot of spiritual healing and understanding God and how he works and what he sounds like to really kill the monster within and stop the generational trauma and legacy of sin.
Yes. Okay. There are some really important points here that I want to circle back on and just foot stomp for the audience. One of the first things that you mentioned was this tool that I love, which is ask for what you need. So, your story about the walk with your husband, I totally related to it because my husband and I had a very similar one. We were redoing our house, our last house, and painting walls for like years. And one
Yeah.
day, one day, it was a little quiet. He's in one room painting, I was in another room painting, and I was like, "What are you thinking about?" And it's the same thing as nothing. I'm like, "You kidding me? Like, I've solved world peace. I've cussed this person out. I have my to-do list for the." I'm just like,
Yeah.
wow. But for you, you went to God and you asked for what you needed. You were like, "Can I get that experience for
Mm-hmm.
5 seconds?"
Mm-hmm.
And God provided that
Mm-hmm.
for that need in that
Mm-hmm.
5 seconds of observing the rustling of the trees, which is a mindfulness practice, right? You're
Mm-hmm.
so in the present. You can't, I always say on the podcast, fear exists in the past and the future, not in the present, unless you're
Mm-hmm.
getting chased by a saber-toothed tiger, right? But the anxieties that we have are existential, they're not really real. And so as you asked for what you need, and then you trusted that God was going to provide that at some point, and then God did. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something people with imposter syndrome have a really hard time doing. It's one of the hardest tools for them to utilize because everything for them is all about service, right? Because everything is
Mm-hmm.
tied to I'm only valuable if I'm achieving and doing for others. And so the fact that someone could do for me is a big no for them.
Mm-hmm.
And for you guys who are thinking through what is the new mindset or operating system I have to have, it seems comical to be like, go to God and ask God for what you need. I know there are plenty of times when I know I have a need, and then I'll be like, I literally haven't even asked God to provide for this. It's such a simple
Yeah.
thing, but we think we're so self-sufficient and independent. that we don't need anybody's help. And the rugged
Mm,
individualism is something that I think we've leaned a little bit too far on in that way.
yeah.
The other thing was, and I love this example that you gave too, and you call it the monster, which we're going to talk about that in a second. I love it. But the monster drove you to accidentally hurt relationships that you deeply cared about. And you had this loving friend come to you and challenge you, and they said, "You thought that about me?" Right?
Uh-huh.
And that's one of the things we talk about a lot in my practice is you have to challenge those thoughts. Like cognitively, this person, do you really think that person would say or do that? And
Mm,
they're like, cognitively, no, but my monster's telling me that's exactly what they're doing. And so a simple
mm,
example would be a compliment, right? People who suffer from imposter syndrome, a lot of times you give them a compliment, you're like, oh my gosh, you did a great job on that project. They'll say things like, oh no, like it was a team effort, knowing full well they did the bulk
yeah.
of the work. Or, oh no, I could have done this other thing better. Or another thing is they're just being nice, is what your monster says. Of they're
Mm,
just saying that to be nice, they don't actually mean it. And so
mm-hmm.
I have to tell my clients, I'm like, you have a choice to decide that voice is telling the truth or that the person giving you that positive feedback is telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And as you're going through this messy middle, there's nothing wrong with asking that person, to your example, hey, you know what? Brene Brown uses a tool I like, which is the crazy story in my head is dot, right? So
Mm,
prefacing it with, hey, I know this sounds crazy, but I just want to, can we air some stuff out? Because what you're saying is I care about this relationship and I want to make sure I'm understanding the context, right?
yeah.
And hey, do you really mean what you're saying about, do you really think I did a good job? And then the next tool is you have to learn how to receive that. So you were open to receiving this feedback from your friend that said, basically between the lines, I love you and I can't believe you would ever think that I would
Yeah.
say or do that to you.
Yeah.
But you had to be open enough to challenge the monster in you to
Mm-hmm.
say, I believe this person over the monster. And
Yeah.
that is once you start that journey, it gets easier over time to challenge that monster. And you know what? I always tell people, I'm like, even if they are lying, like whatever, they said nice things to you. If they don't want to be authentic, that's a them problem. You can give me all the compliments all day, like whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing you mentioned was spiritual gifts. Like you've sprinkled in these beautiful stories of like your mom's spiritual gifts and how they have
Mm-hmm.
supported you and whatnot. And I think it's important to mention that, especially in the church, at least the churches I grew up in, the only spiritual gift that was ever acknowledged or supposedly mattered was proselytizing. So it was like sharing
Mm-hmm.
the gospel, go on a street corner and talk to a stranger and tell them about Jesus. And
Yeah.
I always had such a revulsion to that. Like, I'm like, you want me to do what? And I'm very extroverted. I love people.
Yeah.
And only to realize much later in my deconstruction journey of no, there's a bunch of spiritual gifts.
Mm-hmm.
And my job is to understand what my gift is and offer that gift. And someone else has a different gift. And so my deficiency in that gift is covered by their excellence in that gift. And
Mm-hmm.
that's how we all contribute. And I work with a lot of survivors of child sex crimes. And as they're deconstructing and trying to figure out what was real, they asked me, they're like, what are my spiritual gifts? Because I was told that proselytizing was the only one that mattered. And I'm like, what are
Mm.
you good at? And they're like, I really love to bake or cook or whatever. I'm like, make a casserole, drop it on the doorstep of somebody that you think really needs it today.
Yeah.
And something like that. But is it really that important? They're like, is a casserole really, Alani? You're telling me a casserole? And I'm like, your job is to be authentic to yourself and offer whatever's in your hand lovingly to someone who needs it.
Yeah.
And let God guide you as you continue to gain knowledge in what those spiritual gifts are. But we've all heard stories of there was someone I was talking to who was like, I had no money. I literally had zero, like I couldn't eat that day. And I begged God and I didn't know where my next meal was coming from. And they were laying on the floor crying, and the like mailbox slip in the door all of a sudden opened and like an envelope got thrown in and there was like $50 in there. And it was actually told from her perspective, but also the person who sent it. was like, oh, I got this impulse. My intuition was telling me I needed to do this. And it felt very weird because I thought they
Mm-hmm.
were doing fine. But following that inner kind of North Star and just doing the crazy thing that gives you that peace, right? Of just, okay, I think this is right. Maybe not, but whatever. And so spiritual gifts, I think we do all have a responsibility to let go of some of that programming. And like if you follow the Bible and you follow Jesus, go into that biblical text and research what spiritual gifts are. And I think it's going to, at least for me, it jumped out on the page of, oh, I love administration. I love paperwork. I'm an investigator. Having good paperwork is what wins my
Oh yeah.
case, right?
Yeah.
And so the other thing, the last point I want to mention before we continue on is free will. You also mentioned this
Mm,
element of every time you're challenging God and you're working through this messy middle piece, God offers you this opportunity, right? Where God's saying, this is where I want to take you. This is what you were built for. Do you even want to come on this journey?
mm,
And that is the ultimate hallmark of love is he's God. He can do whatever he wants. He can make us do whatever we want. But he's saying,
mm.
I love you and I want you to decide whether you want to do this or not. And if you don't, I still love you,
Yeah.
which I think is really amazing as well. We only have a few minutes left. Oh my gosh. Can we talk for a second about your monster? So I love how you call it the monster.
Yeah.
What does the monster tell you? What's like the core message it's giving you?
So monster is a kind of like analogy in psychiatry term. It's basically dysregulated cognitive triad. And I talk about this in my video, the connection between emotions, thoughts, and behavior. So when I say monster, I think I don't want to get so binary about it because people are binary beings. So it's like monster is bad and outside voice good. But basically what it is dysregulated, reactionary, very fragile emotional state, right? So that monster, and it's like figurative, right? Like it's monster is a monster because it's like tornadoing inside our heads. But once you learn to slow it down, inside it's like a hurt inner child. And that's how I envision it. So when I say dysregulated, it's let's say that I'm getting triggered by all these situations. Let's say that my podcast listening, this is happening as we speak. Podcast listening stats went down, and I'm like, that situation triggers it. And then old me would have been like, and then it was like, oh my gosh, I'm a failure, right? Oh my gosh, I'm not doing enough, right? That is an automatic thought in the context of cognitive behavioral therapy. And the monster chews it up and then makes another evidence why you're a failure and like why you're never going to be anything good. That monster chews it up, right? But the goal of therapy and really mindfulness, exactly what you stated, is okay, there's a tornado going on. Let's just stop and see what is going on, and then you can assess. And when you said, what if going back and challenging, did you really give me a compliment for reals? Or is it like that actually too is in cognitive behavioral therapy? I imagine like a lawyer, there's a lawyer evidence for that and against that. So let's battle it out in the courts of is it true or not? And the therapy gives you tool to do that. So for me, let's say that my stats and my podcast completely flattened out and I'm like, okay, let's say that is not a direct hit to my ego and say this is why I'm a failure. Let's reason it out. Like what is a evidence that I'm a failure and what is the evidence that I'm not a failure so that you have a little bit more sound thing. And I just wanted to give the listeners like when especially when this podcast is focused on imposter syndrome, when you dig a little bit deeper and God says don't react out of spirit of fear, right? When we say there's a monster inside, it's, oh my God, there's a monster, I can't get it out. That would be the response to fear. But it's okay. Let's say I have this dysregulated emotional state. Let's say that it's monstrous right now, it's ridiculous right now. But what's really going on? And really using coping mechanisms and journaling, mindfulness, these are just tools not to make you feel fake happy and high or avoidant, but it's really tools to get you to the courtroom of like rationalizing and finding the evidence to and for. And a good therapist is gonna guide you to slow down the tornado and be like, oh, underneath that tornado, underneath that monstrous, message, there was a childhood memory that was suppressed. Or, oh, that's what you thought about yourself. So it's a beautiful work. And so I'm constantly battling my messy middle right now is I got a conviction the other day and God was like, you need to create content. And I'm like, dude, I'm like so freaking tired, God. I'm sorry, but I'm like tired. Or my messy middle is what if I do something and it's just like waste of my time and money? What if 0% listens to my content? And so there's a lot of doubt, I think, right now. Even after all the work that I did, I think messy middle, messy inside is still there. And you have to really challenge it, but also embrace it. I would say, okay, what if it doesn't work? Like, what's your loss? What's your gain? What's a possibility? So these are really cool conversations that you can have with yourself instead of jumping to the conclusions.
Yes. And you mentioned a tool that I adore, and I use it session one every time, joy versus fear-based decision making. As you're
Yeah.
trying to untangle, because when people come to me, their brain is just in overdrive all the time. So we have to untangle all of that stuff. And a really easy way is, are you making this decision out of joy, or are you making this decision from a place of fear? And if it's
Yeah.
a fear-based decision, that's an invitation to pause,
Mm-hmm.
self-reflect, right? If you believe in God, go to God and be like, what's going on? What needs to
Mm-hmm.
happen for me to get back to peace and joy and those types of elements? And if you are a Christian, the Bible verses in the Corinthians, right, that talk about fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. If you're experiencing that as you're making your decisions, green light. But the
Mm-hmm.
fruits of the flesh, enmity, strife, like all that stuff, that's that pause, that yellow or like hard stop red, and don't move
Mm-hmm.
until you get that peace and that love and that joy back. And yeah, that's a really easy one. And it also is a great tool to help you untangle and be like, oh, I didn't realize I was making that decision from a fearful
Mm-hmm.
place. Oh my gosh, that is so good. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
And man, unfortunately, our time is over, but this was just such an incredible conversation. Thank you, Dr. Kim, for coming on. I
Yes,
know
thank
so
you.
many people are going to be encouraged. Now, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm a child psychiatrist with private practice in Texas. I see age 4 to 64. But what's exciting and what's recent development is that I'm really launching my public speaking career and growing my podcast. But there is an online course coming. So we talked about it, that cognitive behavioral therapy. How can you do that? Because I think a lot of people are scared to go to a therapist. It's a risk to spend your money and time. So I wanted to create an online course and that's in the work. So if you want to follow me and what's developing, go to my Linktree link that I'm going to give to Alani, where you can really follow up and it's going to launch probably and hopefully early 2025 to start a new year with new you. So I'm really excited about that.
Oh my goodness. We will definitely link all that in the show notes. So you guys go run to Dr. Kim's page, listen to her podcast. I'm so thankful for your incredible work. And folks, if you're looking for other resources, check out my life purpose exercise freebie on my website, mightysparrowcoaching.com. I have video prompts for you to help guide you, or you can check out my best-selling book, The Least of Us: How Your Imposter Syndrome Points to Your Greatest Power. It's available at all major book retailers. I'm also really excited to host the Joyful Money Club starting January of 2025, where we are going to be taking active steps by playing a fun Monopoly game that only you can win because you're creating the board game, and in community of supporting each other and overcoming our inner imposters to see our worthiness with our finances. And so check out the link for that in our show notes. Until next time, humble warriors, please remember the world needs who you were made to be. Thank you so much for joining us today on this journey to discover how you can harness your inner imposter syndrome to work for you. Have a good day, and I love you guys. Bye. If you enjoyed this episode and would like some help overcoming your imposter syndrome, check out the free life purpose exercise on my website and subscribe to my blog. If you already know what your life purpose is and are ready to crush or harness your imposter syndrome, then you're going to love my best-selling book, The Least of Us: How Your Weakness Points to Your Greatest Power. Available on Amazon and all major book retailers. Or you can hit me up at Alani at mightysparrowcoaching.com to discuss private coaching or corporate and government training. That's ALANI at mightysparrowcoaching.com. Listen, there's only ever been one you, and there will only ever be one you. And you have a specific gift to give that the world desperately needs. Don't let your self-doubt be the thing preventing you from living your most joyful and impactful life. Until next time, I'm always cheering you on.